In this presentation, I want to explore the workflow from Cinema 4D into Unity so that we can model custom components for our level design. Now, you could really use this workflow for any external 3D modeling application, but I'm going to focus on Cinema 4D. And there's a couple of things that I want to prepare for setup. And the first thing is that I have a cube that I've placed roughly in the center of my scene. And I want to remind you that I'm working at a scale of 4 meters along the X, 4 meters along the Z, and 1 meter along the Y. So I have this 4 by 4 by 1 meter cube, and this is going to provide, this is kind of the scale that I'm working at. This is the common denominator that I'm modeling things around. Now remember, we can change the size of this later and we can make custom pieces, but I just want some sort of common denominator that I can work from. And I've decided that 4 meters square seems to be appropriate. So in order to set up this workflow, what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch Cinema 4D, and then I'm temporarily going to hide Cinema 4D just for a moment because I want to get organized. And on the desktop, I'm going to create a new folder, and for the sake of the demo, I'm going to call this Cinema 4D Models. Let's try to get that spelling right here. Models, there we go. I'm going to get rid of this extra file that I inadvertently generated. So I have a Cinema 4D models folder on my desktop. Now, more appropriately, I would put this inside my Marble project, and I would create a folder in the root of the Marble game. At this point, I won't move it into the assets folder because that's part of the search path or search directory for Unity. So I'm keeping my assets outside of the assets folder, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. But for the sake of the demo, I'm creating a folder on the desktop to emphasize the importance of keeping your assets separate from Unity while you're creating them. I'm going to go back into Cinema 4D, and I'm just going to make some really quick, simple models. Now, I'm going to generate a cube. Now, this cube by default is 200 centimeters cubed in all directions. Now, I'm working at a scale of 4 centimeters squared with a Y dimension of 1 meter. And remember, 100 centimeters is 1 meter, so I'm just going to change these values to create a 4 meter by 4 meter cube that's 1 meter tall, and I can do that by using 400 along the X and 400 along the Z. So this is the shape that I want to create. Now, I could really, create this shape very easily inside Unity. I don't require a 3D modeling application to do this, but let's say I wanted to turn this into some kind of a ramp so that my player doesn't have to jump up on this platform but can kind of gradually coast up on the platform. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this model editable. I'm going to go either into point or edge mode. I'll go into point mode, and I'm going to go with the direct select tool. I'm going to use that to select the top 2 points on one side of the object. Now I'm working in the direction of Z, so I'm looking in the Z space and it's pointing in the background. But this could be in the X space as well. I have these 2 points selected. If you remember, my cube has a height of 100 centimeters or 1 meter. And so this object, when it's in space, when it's placed in the 3D space, its center point is 0. It's at the 0, 0, 0, the origin of the space, which means that half of the cube, half of the top of the cube, is in the positive Y, and the bottom half of the cube is in the negative Y. That's why when I select 2 points along the top of the cube, if I look at this, the Y position for those 2 points are at 50 centimeters, and if I select the 2 bottom points, they're at negative 50. So half the cube is above 0, half the cube is below 0. And that'll be valuable to know because when I select these top 2 points, I could slide these points down, okay, to make my ramp. But what I'll do is I'll just key in a value along the y-axis. I'm in the position, the coordinates manager down here, and I'm focusing on the position. And I'm going to set this to negative 49 centimeters, which means that that's 1 centimeter above the bottom edge of this. So I've just made this simple ramp. That's all I'm going to do to it for now. And I'm going to choose to do a file, save as, and I'm going to save this to the desktop inside my project folder, C4D models, and I'll just simply call this ramp. And I'll hit save. That's my ramp object. This is the object that I want to import into Unity. I'll talk a little bit about texturing later. Now, there's two ways that I could import this model into Unity. Because I have Cinema 4D launched and installed, and because I have Unity launched and installed, Unity has the capability, it has some plugins that are by default installed we need to activate. And these are 3D model importer plugins, and it works with all the major 3D modeling applications. And what you can do is you can drag a 3D model directly into Unity. And I'm just going to right click, I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call this models. So I just have a models folder. I'll double click inside the models folder. Now what I can do is I'm going to go inside my Cinema 4D models folder. I'm going to take my ramp C4D file and I'm going to drag and drop it into the models folder. Now you'll see that it automatically converted and imported that model for me. The first time you do this, you might get prompted to quit Cinema 4D so that Unity can manage the plugin for the first time. But if you have Unity and Cinema 4D installed, you can use this plugin method of simply dragging Cinema 4D models into Unity. Alternatively, what we could do, I'm going to go back to Cinema 4D and I'm going to modify this ramp. I'm going to make another version of this ramp, and I'm going to make it taller on the end. So I'm going to bump the Y value of these 2 points that I've just selected up to 150 centimeters. So now I have a second instance of the ramp. It's much steeper, and so I'll choose to do a file, save as. Now this time around, I would save this in my models folder because I do want to preserve my source files. But for the sake of the demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this ramp02, so it's a second instance of a ramp, or maybe I'll just call it ramp2 because I don't anticipate having more than 10. That's why I use that 02 naming convention if I'm going to go beyond 10. I'm going to go look for my project folder, which I have organized inside my Marble game project, inside assets. I'm going to go into my models folder. I'll save this directly into this location. And now when I go back to Cinema 4D, excuse me, Unity, and it takes a moment and my models folder updates to show me this second file. Now, for some reason, if the importer plugin isn't working inside Unity or you're not getting the results that you want, there is a manual conversion of these files that you can do that you can drag and drop into Unity. And that's by creating your file, saving your Cinema 4D project, and then choosing File, Export. And what we want to export as is an FBX. This is sort of a universal 3D file format. I'm going to save FBX. I'm going to save this for the sake of the demo. I'll go straight out to the desktop. And I'll go into my project folder. And I'll call this ramp3 for the sake of the demo, and I'll hit save. Now the FBX exporter comes up. I'm going to let everything default. I'll say OK. And I now have an FBX file. There it is. And I can drag this directly into Unity. So you can see there's a couple of different ways to get models in. You do not need the plugin. In fact, when we use that Cinema 4D plugin that I just mentioned, basically what's happening behind the scenes is that Unity is converting the Cinema 4D file basically to an FBX file or something similar to it. So I have these three models that I can use, and I can just drag those directly out into my scene view, or I can drag them into my hierarchy. Remember, if I drag them into my hierarchy, the difference is that it places it at 0, 0, 0, which I find useful. Okay, so I have this this little ramp in my scene. I'm holding down the command key while I click and drag, and you can see that that kind of snaps this this ramp in place. So I'll throw that ramp out into the scene. Now I got a couple of issues with my ramp. I'll point out two of them. The first thing is I'm getting this kind of strange shading where it gets dark on one side and gets lighter on the other. So it's basically ignoring the lighting setup here. In fact, if I throw ramp 2 into the equation, you might be able to see that a little bit more clearly. Also, the other issue that I'm going to run into is that by default, any models that we introduce from a 3D modeling application is not going to have colliders assigned to them. So what that means is I can pass right through these models. There's no collision being made, no collision being detected. Okay, so I want to solve both of those problems of this lighting problem, or it's actually a normal surface problem, and I also want to solve the collider problem. Now, the way that we'll do this is we want to look at the file importer. And the way that we do this is that we select the object from the project manager, or the project panel. Okay, so this is actually the asset that we've imported. In other words, I don't want to do this by selecting the asset in the hierarchy, because I get all the components in the inspector. And what I want to do is I want to select the model and then look at the inspector. And this is the import settings for that for this file. So I can change a lot of these settings, and when I do, I want to apply any changes that I made. And I want to point out that once we make some changes, we'll see an apply button pop up down here. The two changes that I want to make, the first one to solve the collider issue, I can solve this two ways. The easiest way to solve it is that if you look at the Model tab under the import settings, about 5 or 6 items down, there's a Generate Colliders option, which by default is turned off. And so if I have the file selected and I look in the inspector, I can choose to generate colliders on import. You can see the apply button pops up, and so I'll hit apply. So now when I hit the play button, if I go find my ramp 1 object, you can see that now I can roll on top of this model. So by default, any 3D application where you import models, they will come in without colliders. You can see that my ramp 2 still does not have colliders. So again, review, if I want to fix that, I'll select the file in the project panel. I'll go to the inspector and I'll make sure that Generate Colliders is turned on. And it's an easy thing to overlook, but you have to hit the apply button in order for that to update the file. It updates the file, updates the instance of that, that model inside of our scene, and so now you can see that we can bounce off that. Okay. The other issue that I want to address is I want to select the model, and I want to correct for this kind of strange shading issue that's happening. And what's happening is that under our normal and tangent component, we're going to set our normals rather than importing our normal or our surface directions from Cinema 4D. What we want to do is we want to recalculate our normals. I'll hit apply, and once I recalculate the normals, you'll see that the object gets lit and receives textures just as it should. So if you get this strange kind of shading, you'll want to make sure that you set your normals to calculate. So that's a real quick overview of modeling, making some simple models inside Cinema 4D, saving them out, and then importing them into Unity. We looked at a couple different methods. You can manually generate an FBX file and drag that in, or you can use the import plugin for Cinema 4D. And again, that's by default. If you have Cinema 4D installed and you have Unity installed, you have the capability to use that Cinema 4D plugin. So experiment with that process. We'll push this a little bit further in the next presentation.